This has been a very long time coming. I've known Laura for a while. She's put on such incredible exhibits and a fantastic book on the Dilexi Gallery, among other books. I've known Narin Dickerson, who's her research assistant, and helped with the book for a very long time. It was pre-pandemic. Narin and I went on a hike together, and we spent the whole time with him blowing my mind about Paulina Peavy, who I'd never heard of. And so I knew the book was coming then. It's been a long time coming, and it was worth the wait. It is truly incredible, and we're very excited to have you all here tonight to celebrate this incredible book. A few notes about the program. Laura and Narin are going to do a presentation on Peavy at the beginning up here, and then we're going to take about a 15 to 20 minute break where the library will be open and you will be able to see Peavy's masks that she made, which are incredible. You also get to see our library, and then we're going to come back for an incredible, gosh, the sound check was amazing, set from Bohemian Cristal instrument in here, and then the library will continue to be open to check out the masks. But without further ado, please put your hands together for Laura Whitcomb.
No, I should amplify. Can you hear me now?
The speaker's not on.
I'm going to get it a little closer to you. Okay. How about now? How about now? Thank you all for coming. I'm so delighted that the weather has allowed the clouds to subside, and we had a lovely evening to congregate. Thank you, Alex, for all you coming to PRS for the first time. I think that history of Manly P. Hall was really important, and this is a wonderful venue and with incredible programming. So that's why this project is so meaningful to have here, because not just the history, but also just the fantastic programming that we wanted to participate with. So I'm going to be speaking to my slides here. The book, Paulina Peavy, Etherian Channeler. First I'd like to extend a special thank you to Dr. Eileen Susan Fort, the editor of this publication, for her work in condensing and clarifying vast amounts of information, 600 pages. I'd also like to express gratitude to the Peavy Estate, Catherine Armstrong, who's here tonight, and is co-presenting this event, and Andrew Edlin Gallery in New York, and of course the research director that I really would have been, I think, mostly unable to accomplish what this book documented, Narin Dickerson, who's going to be speaking after me. So, and then tonight we have a lot of musicians and other collaborators from the Paulina Peavy exhibition that we did at Beyond Baroque in 2021, and I see a lot of you that attended that, and it's wonderful to see you again. So, in recent years, the art world, as you well know, has welcomed channeler artists and those that engage the manifold of the occult. Notably Hilma F. Clint, Leonard Harrington, Remedios Varo, and those exploring new spiritual modalities like Agnes Pelton. Paulina Peavy, an artist who aligned herself with spiritualism in the 1930s, joins this group. She is unique as the first known channeler artist communing with an astroculture being that guided the creation of her art for over 5 decades. Peavy's role was crucial, as her discarnate guide, Lacamo, who first came to her through a channeled session, would identify as both coming upon a spaceship and sharing the attributes of both being male and female. Lacamo offered an explanation that the meaning of human life evolved through a process of 12,000-year cycles, each with a lesson learned for the growth of eternal wisdom. These 12,000-year cycles saw gender evolving and devolving through 4 3,000-year seasons, with the pinnacle of the cycle among these 4 seasons being the summer age, where females dominate, bringing universal peace. Peavy's art was incrementally infused with new symbols over a period of 5 decades, preparing audiences for a new era of consciousness, as each symbolic layer activated our dormant psyche. The book delves into Peavy's compelling life, beginning in Oregon, her gallery and education in California, and her central role developing the San Pedro art scene, all before she became the first artist to present the world with a feminist astroculture philosophy. Peavy's journey through art and philosophy is deeply influenced by her experiences of trauma, adding layers of complexity to her narrative. The book delves into these experiences, prompting readers to question the authenticity of her encounter with Lacamo. In a time when society is reevaluating beliefs around UFOs, which are now referred to as UAPs, Peavy's story presents a state of liminality, where certainty is elusive. The book offers 2 interpretations. Firstly, Lacamo is an extraterrestrial or interdimensional being, delivering a philosophy for humanity's salvation, or, secondly, Lacamo is a construct of Peavy's psyche, a coping mechanism, born from trauma, imbuing her life with a sense of divine purpose. This duality underscores humanity's ability to absorb mythological stories and reinterpret them within a framework of imagination, seeking meaning amidst adversity. Either way, Peavy's journey and creative output remain captivating. What I would like to point out tonight is that many of the symbols, practices, and themes of her art and belief system echoed a great deal of the occult and esoteric philosophies of communities that were prevalent here in Southern California and the West Coast. Research for this project uncovered many new facts revealing the existence of esoteric alliances among emerging abstract artists in Los Angeles. Exploring this topic at PRS is particularly meaningful, given Manly P. Hall's significant role as a harbinger of occult revival. And I would like to present these parallels tonight. So, arriving in Los Angeles in the early 1920s, Peavy became part of a vibrant community of abstract artists, some of whom she studied with at Chouinard Art Institute, such as Hans Hofmann and Morgan Russell. The community revered Eastern philosophies. Allied with synchronism and early abstraction, Russell and Stanton MacDonald Wright, who Peavy would show, continued the ideas of Kandinsky, exploring synesthetic correlations between color and sound, and the harmonic effects of music through the vibrational properties of color when painted in scales. Kandinsky drew inspiration from theosophy, particularly the treatise of Besson and Ledbetter's Thought Forms, which was published in the year of Peavy's birth. Paulina Peavy Etherian Channeler documents the vibrant art scene in San Pedro during the 1920s and 1930s. Her gallery exhibited artists like the synchronist, Stanton MacDonald Wright, and the conscious surrealist, Lurser Feidelson. So these are just documentation of the artists that were in her oeuvre that she was showing with and that she brought to San Pedro, which really redefines a new chapter in history for California abstract art. After her showcasing her work at renowned venues such as SF MoMA and what is now Lacamo, her art was featured in Raymond Piper's Cosmic Art, a compendium of visionary artists which was completed posthumously by the psychic and artist Ingo Swann, who I'm sure many of you here are familiar with. In the 1930s, Peavy, who had been exploring esoteric and hermetic literature, delved into spiritualism, drawing inspiration from its encouragement for artists to depict channeled entities. In America, spiritualist activity and artistic exploration thrived at centers like Camp Silverbell, Lilydale, and Harmony Grove, where artists documented the spirit realm through art. This profound connection between art and spiritualism saw figures like Victor Hugo seeking solace by channeling his deceased daughter, resulting in the creation of abstract shapes through automatous channels. artists like Georgiana Houghton and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood also embraced spirit drawings. The Surrealists were particularly fascinated by spiritualist practices, holding seances and finding inspiration in mediums like Helen Smith, who claimed communication with beings from Mars. André Breton, in incorporation of a seer, in his Madame Sacco here, in his novel Nadia, further highlighted her influence on the Surrealists, a movement Peavy was familiar with through Lorster Feidelson. So Peavy encountered the astroculture being Lacamo through a medium, echoing the 18th century polymath Emanuel Swedenborg and his accounts of contacting spirits from other planets. The Swedenborgian Society had established itself during the gold rush in California, and Swedenborg himself was given the task to re-explore the Bible, and Lacamo guided Peavy to feature biblical figures, posing them with a new explanation, suggesting these biblical figures were actually seers in the spiritualist tradition. So the next slide features her work at what became known as the Temple of Religion, which was part of the Golden Gate Exposition in San Francisco in 1939. And she has, basically what you're seeing here are the incremental layers of 50 years. But on the photo to the my right is actually what these original paintings began as, these portraits of biblical figures who she's posing as spiritualist channelers, which is rewriting the legacy of Western religion, and of course it met with significant public outcry. So Peavy also blended gender and race as a means to dissolve their hierarchies. She revered the Tres Grandes Mexican muralists, some of whom had close ties to spiritualism and Rosicrucianism, in the case of Diego Rivera. She studied at Chenard here in Los Angeles at the time Segueros taught and painted a large mural there. And she gave lectures on Orozco, whose work Prometheus and Pomona undoubtedly she would have seen. Peavy embraced their allegiance to Universopolis, which is the idea of an idealized blending of all races into a unified people, which was championed by Jose Vasconcelos and his idea of la raza cósmica. Peavy's cosmology echoed the esoteric philosophies prevalent during the golden age of esotericism here in Southern California, largely fostered by figures like Manly P. Hall and the abundant theosophical centers. California emerged as a hub for the second generation of theosophist leaders, with influential figures such as Annie Besant and Alice Bailey, who were closely associated with Crotona here in Hollywood. And Catherine Tingley, who established Lomaland near San Diego. I don't know if Michael Carter's in the audience. He gave an incredible talk on Theosophy's early roots, but I'm sure that will be available online. I thought I saw him earlier. The theosophical influence extended to salons hosted by William Levington Comfort here in Highland Park, or nearby Highland Park, where artists like Agnes Pelton, members of the Transcendentalist painting group, including Dane Rudyard, and artist Mabel Alvarez congregated. Dick Lemay claimed he had traveled to Tibet in 1928. Upon his return, established the Mental Physics Spiritual Teaching and Retreat Center here in Los Angeles before it moved to the Joshua Tree. Notably, George Adamski, later a prominent figure in astroculture, founded another theosophical branch, which was the Royal Order of Tibet, which was in Laguna. And he had a radio show, which Peavy most likely would listen to because San Pedro was they were all very closely aligned in the South Bay. He would eventually move to the desert, as mentioned, and join a really productive community there. So Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, Annie Besant, Helena Roerich, and others channeled what they called ascended masters. And these were the figures that would dictate many of the scripts and the publications that they wrote about. They were all like works of channeled literature. And this really continued the tradition of Delphi, where the Sibyls played important roles in religious and prophetic practices. This environment nurtured strong female leadership. And these women, continuing this ancient practice of the prophetess, were instrumental in shaping the landscape of esotericism during this time. In the 1920s, women were increasingly given central roles within this alternative spiritualist community, for reflecting a broader societal shift towards recognizing women's agency and leadership. Aimee Semple McPherson, for instance, established the Four Square Church in Echo Park, a movement notably fictionalized by Nathaniel Hawthorne's Day of the Locust. These empowering positions of women in esotericism and alternative religion provided Peavy with further agency to assert her own philosophy and contribute to the evolving discourse surrounding spirituality and gender dynamics. So in San Pedro, this book posed somewhat of a polemic because a great deal of abstract art history has been discounted in terms of its connections to esotericism. And I was so over the moon delighted when Narin Dickerson found this article, which documents Paulina Peavy's very close friend, who was the director of the San Pedro Library, and it offers a glimpse into their esoteric interests through a list of books purchased. This friend who was also the director of the library and a confidant of Peavy, curated a collection that reflected a diverse range of topics. And this is, in the 1920s and early 1930s, including astrology, alternative spirituality, developing intuition and magical practice. There's books by Annie Besant, and then there's a book called The Academy of Souls. And in this book, there's communication between a Martian engineer and a protagonist, detailing their extensive interaction. So the Martian entity communicated by attaching itself to sufficient energies, aiming to enlighten humans about their misguided ways. So this really is a really great example of the atmosphere that was sort of preparing the possibilities of welcoming these new possibilities, but also were informing the imagination, the imagination of the unconscious, and were building into the possibility of this mythological construct that she would eventually preach through her art and philosophy. So one of these books, which is very important, and I say it's very important because it really connects to a lot of the ideas of Paulina Peavy's cosmology, the 12,000 year cycles, this fusion of gender, and the book is Oaspe, and it was channeled in 1882 in New York. It was the first channeled work on typewriter, but it outlines the cyclical time patterns which are akin to Peavy's belief, and it's divided into stages of 3,000 years, which is very much like Peavy's cosmology. It's channeling ascended masters, and Ormzad, who's this, much like Lacamo, is this fusion of gender. And it prophesied a forthcoming wave of UFO visitations. And this was written in 1882, which aligns with Peavy's encounters. And the convergence of themes and prophecies, they likely resonated deeply with Peavy, further shaping her philosophical outlook and artistic endeavors. I'd also like to say, after Roswell and when the astroculture zeitgeist arrived, this was one of the #1 selling books of that period. So many a great deal of the cosmologies that are discussed in OASPE they really parallel ancient Egypt. And Peavy's cosmology shared striking similarities with ideas found in OASPE and theosophy and anthroposophy. And she viewed ancient Egypt as the best example of the summer age in her cycle, a sentiment echoed by many esotericists who considered Egypt fundamental to the wisdom religions. During the 1920s, Egyptomania swept through Southern California. You have Howard Carter and his newsreels of the discoveries of Tutankhamun. You have the Rosicrucian Order in San Jose that are financing these unbelievable archaeological digs that are bringing back works of Akhenaten IV and Hatshepsut and building this incredible library. But if you look at these Egyptian antiquities, I mean, it's very interesting because you start seeing examples of gender fluidity. Akhenaten has this tiny waist, and Hatshepsut has a beard. And this gender fluidity and its connection to Egypt really might have also informed this percolating cosmology. I'm just going to skip to leading this fusion of gender really leads into alchemy. And Peavy and Lacamo's cosmology held profound significance, symbolizing the culmination of reincarnation, which was embodied in the iconic figure of the pharaoh. So for Peavy, the pharaoh was the highest state of this fused gender, and it really plays into the alchemical tradition of the rebus and the fusion of gender, which is an important step before transmutation can take place in the alchemical tradition. Peavy's channeling or imaginative landscape joined an esoteric zeitgeist in California that paved the way for public receptivity to astroculture in the years before Roswell. The zeitgeist was further expanded through film, pulp fiction, and science fiction. Artists like Grant Wallace depicted astroculture beings reminiscent of silent film's golden era. In the 1930s, we had Alexander Wiegers, who was a Dutch-born artist residing in Carmel, California. And this one is from the 40s, but it is before Roswell. So you can just see that the landscape of saucer phantasmagoria and this astroculture. It's almost as if there's a yearning for it. And going back to just the history of extraterrestrial UFO and now what is called UAP history. And this begins with like the wheels of Ezekiel in the Bible, but the literary landscape is vast, and you can also include it are Voltaire's Le Micromegas and the Victorian novel L'Ariel, which was the first to use the term Martian. And this, like in this, ether cars are described, and of course Jules Verne described strange lights on flying machines around the world that forcibly abduct people. So these literary precedents inspired many artists to explore the unknown, leading some to settle in the desert where a zeitgeist of communion with extraterrestrial beings took root. From Jack Parsons invoking ceremonies to incarnate a scarlet woman to the surreal landscapes of Yi Tongyi, the desert became a place that defied conventional notions of space, time, and materiality. The desert would go on to host one of the most seismic events of the mid-century, the newsworthy Roswell crash, which plunged the global psyche into the UFO age. In Southern California, against the backdrop of ufologists protesting the atomic age's war machine, esotericism and hermetic philosophies blended seamlessly to offer a modern perspective on encounters with extraterrestrial beings. Figures like George Van Tassel, Adamski, Teska, Truman Bethurum, and the artist Annabelle Krebs, who went by the name Columba, alongside the I Am movement, played a significant role in shaping the discussion on extraterrestrial contact. They drew inspiration from spiritualism and the idea of communion with ascended masters. So this idea of the Hermetic and esoteric traditions and the spiritualist traditions of convening with the unknown, this really seamlessly played into the now new age of UFOs and what experiencers induce. George Van Tassel, influenced by Tesla, which was also a serious factor within Unarians, claimed to receive telepathic messages from an interdimensional extraterrestrial named Ashtar in 1952, a name which echoes Blavatsky's secret doctrine, as well as the Mahabharata. His strong opposition to the nuclear arms race was evident in his alleged communication, which called for intervention. The Etherian Society, founded by Dr. George King, also claimed connections with cosmic masters and offered help to humanity in facing earthly challenges and ushering in a new age. Peavy emerged at this time as a significant figure in the astroculture scene. She was creating her own manuscript, she was publishing her own literature, she had created her own masthead. She almost wanted to trademark herself as an astroculture prophet. She became connected with the Flying Saucer Bureau and Space Review, which featured some of her work. So she was really joining this commercial zeitgeist, and she went on to even have her own appearances on television and radio. And we do have one of the publications from this period that features Peavy in a mask that we'll make available for you to see in the library. But I think it's really special for me, particularly, to be here and have this discussion in the sense that when the UAP age arrived with Roswell, one of the most significant responses, not discrediting, not denouncing, but just in a balanced way offering an objective denial was Carl Jung and Manly P. Hall. And this isn't too well known, but they questioned whether these events were prophecies or collective hallucinations influenced by the space age and the profound implications of atomic energy. They emphasized how humanity's search for new symbols could be reinterpreted into ancient metaphysical concepts, like the spinning wheel of Mercury or alchemy or the mandala when we look at the saucer or a spaceship. It becomes this desired divine symbol. Discounting the possibility of otherworldly and dimensional visitations proved to be a setback. So when Peavy was starting to see a pushback to her philosophy, she retreated from the art world, but also really became particularly focused on the aspect that many astroculture experiencers felt that their purpose, the purpose of their arrival, the purpose of their arrival had been in response to Roswell. And Roswell had been the site that had been a landing strip for and was associated with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Peavy felt, and she joined the astroculture community in really feeling that the reason for this arrival was to alert humankind to the dangers of atomic weaponry. So this has a lot to do with the fact that after the explosion, carbon-14 was in everything. But one very important idea that really corroborates why these UFOs or UAPs arrived if we're looking to even with our military disclosures recently, we really should be more open-minded to this, is quantum entanglement, which is a theory that suggests electrons have twins causing disturbances across the universe. So what we were doing here on Earth, by splitting an atom, it's the electron twin might be in another dimension or another side of the universe, and these disturbances were not just affecting us; they were just affecting the eternal space. So this really was what Oppenheimer referred to in his quote from the Mahabharata, "Destroyer of Worlds." So Peavy would employ many techniques in her art that also really connect to this dynamic of the occult and esoteric and hermetic tradition. And I wanted to point out a central theme of tonight is her masks, which we're about to see in the library after this talk. So masks as tools to engage with the unknown have been a consistent thread in human history, offering an intermediary symbol of being between two worlds. Peavy believed she represented humankind and often enlisted indigenous and multicultural themes. Here she is posing, so she also lived in New York's, near the New York garment district, so you can imagine all the haberdashery options she had, and Peavy, who was just so prolific in her abilities. She had also been a graphic designer, a fashion designer. This really shows some of her creative output. But each time she channeled Lacamo, like she created a mask, and thus created her own means of accessing a discarnate entity. So moving on to getting into some of her other techniques that are really provocative and really continue as a thoroughfare are the simographs, which you're seeing here. So, like Hilma F. Klint, Peavy delved into creating metaphysical charts intended to unveil the composition of the universe and facilitate transcendence. They both depicted pyramids, solar plexuses, mandalas, and metaphysical diagrams. Both were coming from the spiritualist tradition, and it's interesting to really analyze between many of the what we call the occult school of artists, their similarities. Both artists claimed divine guidance in their work, incorporated magical writing, and utilized symbolism such as the vine, while developing intricate systems based on numerical frequencies. The intricate tendril-like shapes presented in their abstract works suggested a connection between organic growth patterns and electromagnetic fields, symbolizing the essence of life itself. Peavy, like Klint, employed mathematical and geometrical systems to convey the divine order of the universe, a fundamental aspect of esotericism. This approach often manifested as simography in Peavy's art, which could also be interpreted as maps for navigating space-time. Peavy's fascination with ancient sites, especially those situated on ley lines, alignments connecting earthly energy fields, underscored her belief in their potential to facilitate communion with celestial and sacred forces. Through her art and explorations, she depicted these sacred places while mapping out universal ley lines in space-time. So that was, so you're seeing a lot of her simographic approaches, and I always, the interpretation that the book presents is her works on paper are a cartographic approach, a map to enter portholes. But in terms of a lot of the symbols that you see, some are astrologic symbols, but there is a tradition in spiritualism in automatist writing where a whole a new languages and alphabet systems have been encoded. So this tradition it can go back to Hildegard von Bingen with her Lingua Ignota, again mentioning Helen Smith, whose letters are just up here. This was her Martian writing when she was the woman that the Surrealists had really made as a role model for their interests in spiritual, in seance pursuits. And then you have Hilma af Klint, who's also inscribing numbers and letters. And I find this is and then over here, this is the Enochian tablet of Dee and Kelly, Edward Kelly and John Dee, who were commissioned by Rudolf II, the emperor in Prague, who had one of the greatest alchemical libraries. And this Enochian tablet was resurrected by members of the Golden Dawn, Samuel Mathers. But again, these formation and signs and letters are ways to almost holographically activate the ability to open portals and communicate with the unknown. So there's a lot of interesting ways to kind of decode this. It could be through the lens of the magical tradition, but also in terms of just science and form. That is another way to really objectively look at what Peavy would have been doing in a lot of these works on paper. So I'm going to, the last thing I wanted to bring to your attention before I end here is crystals. And Peavy's work over a period of 50 years, and you have seen a number of the paintings so far, the final layer were these abstract crystals that are so compelling. And in the esoteric tradition, and especially during the New Age movements where like the ideas of Lemurians were kind of recasted and the crystal had the capacity to transmit vast recesses of meaning. And for Peavy, the crystal encoded universal wisdom, which was accrued in these life cycles of 12,000 years. Each 12,000 years was a new lesson learned, and it was this idea of a crystallization of meaning. Crystals are also integral to Enochian magic. We just saw John Dee's scrying crystal. And involving the working with letters, it introduced the concept, as I said, of a holographic system. So ending this talk tonight, I wanted to prepare the audience for what we will have later as a performance by the Czech performer Lenka Moravkova, who's recently come from Prague, and this is where Rudolf II had notably had one of the most compelling libraries in history, and was a large collector of the crystals. And she's going to be performing on the crystal rods of the Bohemian crystal instrument, which it's inspired by the work of the Baschet brothers in the 1950s. So with that said, we are going to just talk about the importance of research, because what's so interesting is so much of Peavy's oeuvre, it continues to need to be decoded. And so many of the artists of the occult tradition, without knowing each other, have these amazing similarities and are speaking a parallel language. And I think this is very important to explore. And Narin is going to just speak about the importance of research, and hopefully inspire you all to persevere learning more about, because there's so many artists that need to be re-reviewed, and we might possibly find a connection between all these faculties within the paintings and art of Paulina Peavy, and learn more about ourselves and the occult and the esoteric tradition at large. So.
Thank you so much, Laura. Really appreciated that talk. I hope you did as well. I'm going to be pretty brief because I'm also really looking forward to going to the library and looking at those masks, because I've seen some of them when we had them at Beyond Baroque, and some of them when they had the gallery show in New York, and they're really amazing. So I'm going to be pretty brief here. When we are researching the lives of artists from the past, how much can we know them? How much do we instead know a story that we create by focusing on information about the artist that resonates most with us? How different is that from knowing them? Is it different? A layered understanding of an artist requires multiple people coming to an artist from multiple angles. And this book offers the first extensive reckoning with a substantial artist. Laura's wonderful and information-packed book, brilliantly edited by Dr. Eileen Susan Fort, contains a complete story of Peavy, but based on my research and the amount of things that we discovered, Laura already mentioned cutting down a 600-page manuscript to much shorter than that, there is certainly the possibility for many other avenues of discussion about Peavy and her work. Given the distance of time between our lives and the central moments in Peavy's life, there are many things that we will never know. Artists are only able to exist in our present memory through the objects that they leave and the traces that they leave behind in the memories of others. And we are enormously grateful to Peavy's sons and grandchildren and other relatives for keeping nearly all the art and ephemera that she had in her studio near the end of her life, and to Catherine Armstrong and the Paulina Peavy Estate for holding on to the materials and organizing them, and Andrew Edlin Gallery as well for funding this project. It was the summer of 2020 when Laura first asked me if I would be interested in helping research a book that she had been commissioned to write on Peavy. Having grown up in Mount Shasta at a time when that small town had 2 traffic lights and 5 stores simultaneously dedicated to different healing crystals and books about UFOs, the initial hook that interested me personally wasn't the connection to UFOs, though I do love spacecraft a lot and have since I was a kid. As a strange aside, here, one sec. There we go. Is a illustration that Paulina Peavy made of Mount Shasta in a children's book in 1930. Anyhow, figured that was a goofy aside. I was intrigued by an artist whose life spanned the entire 20th century, who started their art studies in 1919 and created works available on video in the 1980s. If you were in here earlier, you saw some of them, an edited version of some of the films looping. Somehow, when I first read a description of Peavy, I imagined that she lived a somewhat solitary life, like Agnes Pelton. But as I began to explore, I realized that she not only created work that was bold and dynamic, but also for the first several decades of her life lived loudly and boldly. I started my research into Peavy in the fall of 2020, when most libraries were still closed and some archives had no schedule to reopen. So thankfully, Peavy's bold proclamations, letters to folks from all walks of life, allowed her to, and the events that she organized when she was in San Pedro and Long Beach, allowed her to leave many traces on the folks she encountered, as evidenced by not just dozens of newspaper articles, but hundreds. In many documents that began to be scanned and shared at a much greater pace during those library closures of the pandemic. And that was how I was able to start finding information. Many of those articles contained, just brief details of she was teaching a class. But other times, there were 2 cases early on of articles that I ran across where the reviewer, or the journalist, had intended to, one in the case, interview Peavy at her house, and the other one just go to one of her talks. And the person who interviewed at her house, after being smitten with her conversation, her 6-toed cats, had to, according to the article, call his wife and let her know that he would be late for dinner that night. And the person in San Diego who attended her gallery show mentioned in the article about the gallery show that she followed Peavy's entourage after the talk all through the night until the morning, where they found themselves in a nearby park. I don't think we're going to go that late tonight. And I just want to highlight the importance of research into these kinds of artists. There's, I was able to start finding things online. We were able to find things through, more traditional libraries and archives as well, thanks to Laura being able to travel to where there are many letters at the University of West Georgia. But a lot of these things are being made more and more accessible to someone who doesn't have to travel to begin discovering information about one of these artists. And there are a lot of really interesting artists who, for various reasons, have been overlooked throughout history. Members of marginalized communities, and who's to say why Peavy, eventually fell off the radar of the art world. And I think that's something that the book explores in an interesting way. And also, I want to encourage everyone that if there is an artist who moves you, I initially skeptical about Peavy, came to really love her work by discovering the incredible layers, which Laura discusses extensively in her book. If you get the chance to see one of her oil paintings, look at it closely and look at the layers of translucent varnish oil paint that have been applied over and over again to create patterns which almost shimmer in a 3-dimensional form inside the oil painting. So if an artist inspires you, make sure to document them, because we're only able to have this extensive book about Peavy because people during Peavy's life saw her work, engaged with it, wrote about it, and because her 2 loving sons kept all of her work, and because Catherine ran across the work and also found it amazing. So make sure you are documenting the artists that move you so that they can be remembered in the future. Anyhow, I want to thank you all for coming. I also want to thank